I'm Dennis Trainor Jr. Welcome to Acronym TV. This week, in a story that continues to develop, University of Missouri students won a stunning victory forged from Jonathan Butler's hunger strike and the labor strike of the university's football team, forcing the resignation of University President Timothy Wolfe, whose failure to handle racial abuses ultimately left him jobless. Dave Zirin, the sports editor of The Nation magazine, joins me to discuss. Also, the Million Student March pops off, with students at over 100 colleges and universities here in the United States staging protests demanding free college tuition, full student loan forgiveness for all, and a $15 minimum wage for campus workers. We'll talk with Million Student March organizer Keely Mullen. All that in just a moment, but first, this is Acronym TV. What do you stand for? Acronym TV receives underwriting support from Occupy.com, a news and media channel amplifying the voices of the global 99%. Find out more at Occupy.com. And by Mint Press News. Mint Press is independent journalism through the lens of social justice and human rights. Get the story behind the headline and how money and special interests are shaping a global class war at Mint Press News. And finally, we're supported from individual viewers like you. Support Acronym TV with a monthly donation at patreon.com/Dennis Trainor Jr. Last month, a swastika scribbled in human feces was found in the restroom of Gateway Hall on the University of Missouri campus. For Jonathan Butler, a 25-year-old African-American grad student, the act was not an isolated one, and the lackluster response from the school administration had become too much to bear. He went on strike. A hunger strike. "I already feel like campus is an unlivable space," Butler told the Washington Post, "so it's worth sacrificing something of this grave amount because I'm already not wanted here. I'm already not treated like I'm a human." That was before University President Timothy Wolfe resigned on Monday morning. His resignation came because Butler's hunger strike inspired a labor strike by the black players on the university's high-profile Division I football program. That action was followed by the team's coach standing in solidarity with his players. For a few brief days, Tim Wolfe dug his heels in and doubled down, but by Monday morning, he was out.
I'm resigning as president of the University of Missouri system. We stopped listening to each other. We didn't respond or react. We got frustrated with each other, and we forced individuals like Jonathan Butler to take immediate action or unusual steps to effect change. This is not, I repeat, not the way change should come about.
Please stop focusing on the fact of the Mizzou hunger strike itself. Look at why did we have to get here in the first place, and why the struggle, and why we had to fight the way that we did. At the end of all this, after all the letters we've sent, all the in-person interactions, after all the forums we've attended, after all the tweets and DMs that we've sent, telling the administration about our pain, it should not have taken this much, and it is disgusting and vile that we find ourselves in the place that we do.
Dave Zirin, writing on The Nation, pointed out that, quote, "The administrators created a world in which universities revolve socially, politically, and economically around the exploited labor of football. Now let them reap what they sow." So, Dave Zirin is The Nation's magazine sports editor, author of 8 books on the politics of sport, most recently Brazil's Dance with the Devil, the World Cup, the Olympics, and the Fight for Democracy. Dave, thanks very much for coming back on Acronym TV.
Great to be here. Thanks, Dennis.
So this is a huge story. It's got so much rolled into it. Direct action or a labor strike. We could talk about the difference or what those two things are, or if it's a little bit of both. A little bit of First Amendment kerfuffle rolled into it as well. Were you surprised with how quickly this demand, Saturday night football players make a demand, Monday morning, president of the university out?
I'm not surprised at all. The only thing that surprised me was the fact that school president Tim Wolfe on Sunday really did say that he was going to dig in his heels and that he wasn't going anywhere. So that surprised me, how quickly that switch flipped. But as soon as the players intervened and said, we are not going to play until this president is gone and until Jonathan Butler is done with his hunger strike, I mean, at that point, it was just tick, tick, tick. I mean, Gary Pinkel was faced with a kind of polarizing decision where the majority of his players, because the black players on that team make up 69% of the players, went up to him and said, we're not going to play. And then he had to choose a side. This coach makes over $4 million a year. He's the highest paid person in the entire public system of the state of Missouri. Yeah. So once you have him on your side, I mean, it's you could say with, I think utter clarity and utter confidence that he's more powerful on that campus than Tim Wolfe is. And so honestly, once the picture was tweeted from his personal Twitter account with the entire team, black and white players, that really was the moment where I thought Tim Wolfe is just done. He is gone.
So the football coach fired the university of the school.
Yeah, and it was good that he did. He was on the side of the Angels in this case, but I totally understand why some people look at this and also say, wow, what does this say about university culture in 2015? But to me, this is about the chickens coming home to roost, or in this case, the golden goose coming home to roost, because it's precisely people like Tim Wolfe who have built campus cultures that have elevated football to such an obscene degree. I mean, Missouri is not special in this regard. In a lot of ways, it's unbelievably ordinary. And it's an ordinariness that speaks, I think, to something that W.E.B. Du Bois talked about 100 years ago, that Upton Sinclair talked about 80 years ago, and that's the degradation of higher education because of the centrality of sports, particularly football. And this has only become more degraded as football in particular has become this mega big multi-billion-dollar business. But when you have somebody like Tim Wolfe, who put $72 million into refurbishing the stadium while cutting health care from grad student teachers, I mean, that tells you all you need to know. He's the person who put football at the center of campus life. He's now reaping what he sowed.
As students kind of gained some power on the campus this week and in the aftermath, there was a kind of an ugly scene, I think, that unfolded where Melissa Click, who is an assistant professor of mass media, is caught on camera calling for muscle, basically, to oust a 20-year-old student who was, I guess, doing some freelance work for ESPN, basically trying to exercise his First Amendment right to cover the event.
Hi, media. Can I talk to you?
No, you need to get out.
Well,
you need to get out.
No, I don't.
You need to get out.
I actually don't.
All right. Hey, who wants to help me get this reporter out of here? I need some muscle over here. Help me get him out.
What is so hard about respecting our Bush? Because I have a job to do. Yeah. We don't care about your job.
They have a life to live. They have an education to get and a life to live.
I'm a
Please
student
live.
too.
But sir, these are more students who are asking you.
Don't too much. You need to calm down. Okay, but that's my job. And this is our friend. Our friend's life was on the line. We're asking you to respect that. And I'm trying to document that for history.
Everybody else has documented
Everybody
it,
else
sir.
is
You
too.
got your
They're being
own.
respectful.
You got it.
Everybody else
You
is
have
too, but they're being
documented it.
respectful.
Please.
They're being respectful about it. Everybody else is too, but they're being respectful. You're
They
not.
just want to be together.
That's simple.
Okay, they are together.
No,
I'm not going
you are
in there right
no.
now.
No, you're not.
You're infringing on what they need right now, which is to be alone.
All right. Now, I need you.
There's a guy.
You lost this one, bro. You lost this one, bro. Back up. You lost this one, bro. You just lost this one, bro. You lost this one, bro. Back up.
Hey, where the sign's at? Just put the sign in his face.
You lost this one, bro. Just back up. Just back up. You lost.
As a journalist watching that unfold, what's going through your mind?
I mean, honestly, what was going through my mind when I saw it in real time was that it was a very unfortunate choice of words by the professor. She has since stepped down, and the photographer himself was there because he wanted to record history, and it's understanding why a photographer would be there. I also thought in real time that it's also very understandable why students would want a safe space to be able to gather and speak. And I mean, given the rampant rumors of what occurred last night about the KKK being in Columbia, being on campus, about the very real fear that students felt, and about very real threats that went out over social media aimed at black students. I mean, immediately one could understand why it is that they maybe did not want to be photographed. I just think there could have maybe been, I mean, you don't like the look of a professor, of any professor, saying that to a student. But that being said, after it happened, it was used as a backdoor method to go after all the student protesters. It was used as a backdoor way by people who could not give one half of one crap about the First Amendment or freedom of the press, people who didn't say jack crap when reporters were arrested at Occupy, when reporters were arrested in Ferguson, when reporters were killed in Palestine during Operation Cast Lead. You didn't hear anything from some of these same forces who are now screaming fascism at a group of 19 or 20-year-olds exhausted and in the most intense struggle of their lives. So I was extremely disgusted with the media pylon and the way they took that molehill and turned it into a mountain until the professor resigned. And then it just was so ridiculous because you saw the hard right wing and the mainstream media find common cause in going after these young students. And frankly, it made me sick because one of the things that I also believe is, and I don't want to ascribe this to this individual 20-year-old photographer, but I also believe there's something disgusting, like when you have these kinds of moments at Ferguson or in Baltimore, or I certainly saw this in Brazil when I was covering the protests for the World Cup, where the media becomes almost more like paparazzi than actual media. And like I was at demonstrations in Brazil, Dennis, where there were more media members than protesters.
Right.
And so all what they were doing, they were crowding around people as if they were Kim Kardashian coming out of the gym or something. And to me, what journalism is not being a vulture to get photographs to put online so you can get some clickbait. Being a journalist is about building relationships so people trust you and you can get a story. And I mean, the way that a lot of the media, I mean, it's so interesting because everyone's talking about this 20-year-old photographer, but there was so much media on that campus and they were everywhere and they were in everybody's face and they had all their camera equipment. And there's something about that to me is far less about the First Amendment than it is about commerce.
Yeah,
and it just the whole thing is obviously it gets me very angry because I am part of this media thing, and to see people hide behind this idea of like the sanctity of the media when you know they didn't say shit when we were getting beaten and tear gassed in Baltimore. I mean, it's very, very upsetting.
Yeah, I mean, similar things happened to me when I was covering the Occupy movement, and I was also engaged in it, right? So I'm not a journalist like you, I'm more of a storyteller, but we did do something similar, I'm not proud to say, in trying to have a private meeting in a public space, exclude someone. So I mean, you can sympathize in that moment when you feel like you're in this lightning bolt moment of time where you might have some power for just a minute, but the cameras are going to go away soon. So you kind of need them, and then you kind of, again, you need to figure out how to build power, because there's two related threads, right? One is this idea of collective bargaining, student athletes, but the other, the original strike or the original hunger strike, was about racism. You brought up gender and sexual orientation issues as well, but this is an extension of a Black Lives Matter thing.
No, that's true. The hunger strike, I mean, Jonathan Butler, very intersectional thinker, I mean, also did speak about like the removal of Planned Parenthood from campus this year. And gender violence, one instance of which involved the football team, not the current iteration of the football team, but it dates back to 2009 when a student, Sasha Menukori, was a swimmer, accused a football player of rape. The administration didn't take her seriously, and she committed suicide 2 years later. And I mean, this is another thing, the shadow that hangs over the campus. And it's another example about the way the administration privileged the football team, partly as a way to keep them happy, and how that I think in 2015 bit them in the behind because they had been granted so much social capital on that campus. But just to say really quickly, just want to go on the record with this. One, I would certainly argue that the kind of storytelling that you did at Occupy is journalism. I think that's critical journalism, long history of activist journalism, and the work you did was fantastic, but it's definitely journalism. And the second thing is I totally defend the right of people, particularly if they have questions about their own safety, to have these kinds of private meetings. And one of the reasons why I defend it is that we've all seen the way the right wing in recent years has posed as regular media with their cameras and said things that just blatantly weren't true, to take down Acorn, to take down Planned Parenthood. And so, that trust has been abused.
Right.
And so people really, I think, do have the right of self-defense and their own safety before the media has the right to get their page views.
Something that I think about a lot this week is, I'm thinking back to my days at college, and college is not, a microcosm for larger society. It's this beautiful separate world, right, where you get to try on different things. Can this scale up? Do professional athletes look at this and go, huh?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because there's much more of a pipeline, obviously, in so many ways between the college football experience and the pros than there is from college to the real world.
I know that you recently went at the invitation of Greg Popovich with John Carlos, 1968 Olympian, famous for raising his fist on the medal platform. And I know that you wrote that a lot of that meeting was not for publication, or the content of that meeting was not for publication, but one assumes that at least part of what was being said at that meeting is the potential for professional athletes to exercise their elevated platform, such as it is, for social good.
Yeah, and I have no problem with speaking about it. They're a very cool bunch of people down there in Spurs land. They didn't ask me to sign anything or non-disclosure. It's more just protecting the identity of individual players and the questions that they asked, because we really did promise that this would be a kind of safe space. I know that, by the way, that term safe space, I will defend that term from kingdom come to kingdom come. Like, the right is using that as a stick to beat people with. They're like, oh, look at all these coddled whiners. They want their safe space. And then I look at them and they're whining about not having Santa on a Starbucks cup. It's just...
Jesus on a Starbucks cup.
Boggles the mind. Yeah, they want Ben Carson sitting with Jesus on a Starbucks cup. So yeah, that we said it would be a place where they could ask whatever they want. But absolutely, with John Carlos there, we spoke about two big things to the Spurs. And I have to say, and a lot of this, I really do think the credit goes to the coaching staff and the kind of culture that they've established on the team, is that the players were all about it. And they wanted to talk about it. And they had tons of questions about it. And the two things that we talked about were, one, of course, the power of athletes to affect social change if they choose to flex those muscles. And two, the idea that legacy is a much bigger question than what you do on the court or on the field. And that people will remember you by who you were more than even what you did. And I think that connected with them pretty damn powerfully, particularly because there were a couple of players in that room who had spoken out for Black Lives Matter. Mm-hmm. And without question, are going to be faced with doing it again as the movement moves forward.
Yeah, you look at some of the awakening that came about last year around the Black Lives Matter movement. Can say the Cleveland Cavaliers affect a similar? They're not going to. I don't believe they would. But can they say we're going on strike until X happens with Tamir Rice's case?
Yeah, that as you said, it wouldn't happen. But I have you ever been to Cleveland in the last year, Dennis? Out of curiosity.
No, I was in Cleveland a couple of years ago, but not in the last year. No.
I tell you, man, you go there in the last year, it's basically a LeBron-based economy at this point. Mm-hmm. You fly into the airport, everything is LeBron James for sale. You go downtown, it's like the commerce of LeBron James, every restaurant, everything. And it makes you think, if LeBron James actually he doesn't get money for any of this. I can't imagine he's not bringing in hundreds of millions of dollars to the downtown economy of Cleveland just by being there. And of course, he doesn't see anything of that, so it's no skin off him in this regard. Right. But if he made the decision alone to say he wouldn't play until there was justice for Tamir Rice, I think it would send a lot of ripples. But I also think, we always do run into this danger, and I'm not saying you're arguing this, but because I think what you ask in the wake of Missouri is absolutely the question, can athletes flex this on other levels? Right. But I think that there's always the danger of, wanting that Moses to come, like that one person with all the influence who can, pull that lever and make it happen. And it's always worth reminding everybody, and even in the Missouri case, you see it, that while athletes have done very heroic things historically in terms of social change, they actually are very rarely the leaders, and more often they're responding to what's happening off the athletic field. And that's, it's one of those things where it's like, if people want LeBron James to do that, if people want the Cavs to do that, then you better build one hell of a social movement outside the arena so they actually hear it.
Well, Dave, Zirin, a lot in this story, so packed with so many different verticals or convergences, very, very interesting, and that everyone's been following you, writing about it, so I really appreciate you taking your time to join us to talk about it today.
Oh, thanks so much, Dennis. I appreciate you.
Hey, this is Lee Camp from the Moment of Clarity web series, and I support Acronym TV because I want to know what's really going on in the world rather than sucking in this endless production line of mental drivel, vapid, meaningless, empty, soulless, useless, craptastic, disastrous faux debate from the mainstream corporate-run news channels. That stuff abuses my earballs. Acronym TV is the antidote.
$1.3 trillion and counting. That is the amount of outstanding educational debt owed to lenders from former college students. A small little chunk of that $1.3 trillion is my own. Thanks to escalating tuition, student debt has exploded, though, in recent years and surpasses all other types of consumer credit except mortgages. In 2013, nearly 70% of debt belonging to 25-year-olds came from their student loans. This week, students at 100 colleges and universities across the country declared that they are not alone and that they are not alone by walking out of class to demand tuition-free public college, a cancellation of all student debt, and a $15 an hour minimum wage for campus workers. The protest has been dubbed the Million Student March. Connected thematically, these are decentralized protests and direct actions and walkouts, again with three clear specific demands. 1, tuition-free public college. 2, cancellation of all student debt, all of it. And 3, $15 minimum wage for all campus workers. Keely Mullen is a student at Northeastern University and an organizer with the Million Student March. Keely, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
So I am 46 years old. I have about still $90,000 or so in student debt. I have two a middle schooler and a high schooler getting ready to go to college. Tell me why I shouldn't have to repay my debt and why my children shouldn't have to pay for college once it's their turn to go.
That's an excellent question. I think that there's a multitude of reasons that you shouldn't have to pay back that debt. And I also sympathize because I'm about to graduate and I have $150,000 in debt, which is a devastating number. But I think that, first and foremost, the moral argument is that education is and should be a human right, and it's recognized as so in almost every other developed country and every other country in the world except the United States, where we've assigned a cash value to an education, which is entirely unfair and also grants the highest level of education to people with the most access and the most wealth, and then denies it to the people with the least.
And what about the cancellation of debt? Talk about the impact that would have. Some people compare it to, right around the numbers, right around, according to the website Millions March, is about $1.3 trillion in student debt. A lot of people put the number of the bailout in 2008, it's about half that, $700 billion, but actually author Naomi Prims has done a lot of research, and actually the Wall Street bailout, when you take into account everything, is closer to over $10 trillion. So we're talking about a bailout of students in debt that would be a little more than 10% of what we did in 2008 for Wall Street.
Yeah, absolutely. You said it right there. I think this is the demand that really has caused the most controversy, because it's it's the one demand that's not being taken up by Bernie Sanders. It's the only demand. It's the demand that only Jill Stein has actually stood behind in terms of 2016 candidates. That number is colossal, but it's also not colossal when you look at the amount of wealth that's held by the 1% in this society. Unfortunately, a lot of people say there's no money in the budget. There's no money to scrap all of this debt. But the reality is the money is there. It's just being hoarded by a few wealthy elites that we continually give immunity to.
I want to read a recent Facebook post off of the Million Student March Facebook page. I know these are decentralized actions and there are many of these Facebook pages, but I think this was the originating one. It says, "We have an opportunity right now to take control of our education, to fight the institutionally racist nature of corporate higher education, to challenge the inaccessibility of quality education experienced by millions of poor Americans, and to stand against the cannibalistic policies of lenders like Sallie Mae." When I read that, it occurs to me that there seems to be an awareness, and perhaps this comes from, or is it in similarity to, the Occupy movement, across different fronts of social justice about the intersectionality of all these different issues. But tell viewers who are watching, who are scratching their heads, when we're talking about who don't see the connection between racism and student debt.
Yeah, absolutely. Off of the tail of the Black Lives Matter movement, and also with, the stuff that's happening at Mizzou right now, with the students that are facing incredible racist violence from their peers, it's a hugely important connection to make. And I think that it goes, far beyond just higher ed. We live in a society right now where Black lives are not valued. They're not valued nearly to the extent that white lives are valued. And I think that higher education right now is kind of a microcosm of all of this, and the way that capitalism, as a system, has assigned value to certain people's labor and denied it to others in order to sort of maintain wealth where it is.
Keely, by the time this interview airs, the protests across the country will have taken place. We're talking the day before November 12th. What are your expectations for the Million Student March?
Yeah, I'm incredibly excited. I think that coming again, sort of like right as this Missouri stuff is really heating up, I think that a lot of students are looking for some type of infrastructure, within which to express all of these frustrations and this really perpetual silencing. And I really hope that tomorrow gives voice to a lot of people that have felt completely unheard. I want, the president of Northeastern University, who makes $3 million a year, I want him to hear us. But way more importantly than that, I think I want working people and students who feel hopeless and are looking for this type of unity and looking for a movement, to join and a movement to lead. I hope that those people hear us.
Keely Mullen is a student at Northeastern University. She's an organizer with the Million Student March taking place November 12th, the beginning of something big. Keely, thanks very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
That is our show for this week. Thank you so much for watching. My name again is Dennis Trainor Jr., and you have been watching Acronym TV. What do you stand for?